The palace clock struck 6 as Elizabeth made her way down the corridor. The evening light spilled through tall windows, casting long shadows that stretched along the polished floor. The air held a strange mixture of calm and tension, as if the building itself sensed what was coming. In her hand, she carried a leather-bound folder, thick, heavy, and filled with truths she wished she had never needed to read. Her jaw tightened ever so slightly as she approached the small private drawing room. Inside, Edward stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames. His suit was immaculate, his posture elegant, the remnants of a king still clinging to him. When he heard her footsteps, he turned with a practiced smile. It faltered when he saw her expression. "Lilibet," he said gently, "it's been too long." Elizabeth did not return the warmth. She closed the door carefully behind her and crossed the room with quiet authority. She set the folder down on the table between them. Edward looked at it with unease. "What is all this?" She remained standing, hands together. "You know what it is. I would prefer to hear the truth from you." He hesitated before opening the folder. The first page revealed a photograph of him, arm extended, offering a crisp handshake to Adolf Hitler. Edward's face tightened. Elizabeth watched him, her eyes steady. "How did it come to this?" Edward exhaled slowly. "I met them as a former head of state. It was diplomatic, nothing more." She opened the next page herself. It showed Edward inspecting German troops, smiling as decorated officers led him through a military installation. "Diplomatic," she repeated. "You toured their battalions, while Britain prepared for war." He lowered himself into a chair, visibly unsettled. "I thought at the time that Germany was the future, that they had a plan, a structure. Britain seemed lost." Elizabeth stepped behind the table, leaning slightly forward. "And so you aligned yourself with them. You let them believe you could be reinstated if they succeeded." He looked away, silently confirming what he could not say aloud. The room felt colder. Elizabeth sat opposite him, smoothing her skirt with controlled composure. "Our soldiers died by the thousands, families grieved, cities burned, and during all of it you stood among the men responsible." Edward swallowed hard. "I was misguided. I didn't understand what they truly were." "You understood enough to imagine yourself on the throne again," she replied. The words hung heavily between them. "You imagined a Britain ruled under their shadow." Edward ran a hand through his hair. "I wanted stability. I thought they could prevent chaos." "At what price?" she asked. "At the cost of your country's freedom, at the cost of your own conscience." He met her gaze, eyes glassy with regret. "You must believe me when I say I never intended for harm. I did not know what the world would become." Elizabeth shook her head, her voice calm but cutting. "Intentions do not erase consequences. And this," she lifted the photograph from the folder, "this is not harmless. This is not naive. This is betrayal." Edward flinched as if struck. For several long seconds they sat in silence. The fireplace crackled, the only sound in the otherwise suffocating stillness. Finally Edward whispered, "I have suffered for my decisions. Banished from the country I once served, cast out from my family." Elizabeth softened slightly, though not enough to break her resolve. "Exile was the consequence of abdication, not this." She tapped the folder. "This is something else entirely." Edward's lips trembled. "Are you here to punish me further?" Elizabeth rose slowly. "I am here because I needed to look you in the eye and understand how a king of England could stand beside tyranny." He stood too, hands shaking. "Please understand I was lost. After the abdication I felt stripped of purpose. They offered me admiration, a sense of significance. I was blind to their intentions." Elizabeth's expression shifted, still firm, but now touched with the faintest glimmer of sorrow. "And in seeking purpose, you nearly gave away your country." He stepped toward her. "Can you forgive me?" She held his gaze, searching for sincerity, perhaps hoping to find something that could undo decades of disappointment. but she saw only the remnants of a man who had once chosen himself over his country, twice. "Forgiveness," she said softly, "is not mine alone to grant, not for something of this scale." Edward blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "Then what becomes of me now?" "You may remain in Britain if that is what you want," she answered, "but you will not return to public life, not to official duties, not to ceremonial roles. You forfeited that privilege long ago, and this," she gestured to the folder, "ensures it can never be restored." Edward's shoulders sagged, the defeat overwhelming him. Elizabeth walked toward the door. Her steps were slow, heavy with the weight of the conversation. Before leaving, she turned back for a final moment. "Whatever you were, whatever you hope to be, history will judge you, not I." She opened the door. The corridor's golden light spilled into the dim room. Edward stood frozen, surrounded by the documents of his past, photographs that could not be denied, letters that carried the echoes of dangerous promises, ghosts he could no longer escape. Elizabeth stepped out, closing the door with a soft click that sounded far louder in the quiet than it should have. The confrontation was over. But its consequences, like the shadows on the palace walls, would linger for the rest of his life.
The preparations for Prince Philip's world tour begin long before any ship is ready to leave the harbour. In Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere shifts into something sharper, more focused. Staff move with purpose, carrying maps, schedules, diplomatic files, and sealed boxes. This is not a normal royal engagement. It is an international mission representing the crown, and Philip knows exactly what is at stake. On his desk, a mountain of documents grows each day. There are route plans across the Commonwealth, carefully coordinated stops in Asia, Africa, and the Pacific, weather reports for each region, security notes, and detailed briefings from foreign offices. Philip studies them not out of obligation, but out of instinct. His naval background demands precision. He wants every moment accounted for, every risk calculated, every reception properly prepared. Nothing should catch him off guard. His days begin with meetings. Advisors, naval officers, and palace officials gather to finalize the tour's structure. Philip listens to every detail: ship readiness, diplomatic sensitivities, expected ceremonies in each country, and how to navigate political tensions without overshadowing the purpose of the tour. He asks direct questions, adjusts timelines, challenges weak plans, and strengthens the schedule with strategic clarity. This is his world: structure, strategy, efficiency. Away from the meeting tables, he prepares himself. His uniforms are checked one by one: ceremonial dress for formal receptions, naval attire for inspections, evening suits for state dinners, and light clothing for life aboard the ship. Medals and insignia are packed carefully in a case designed for travel. His valet organizes everything with military precision, but Philip personally inspects each item. Discipline matters to him. There is also the human side of preparation. Elizabeth visits him as he packs a stack of books: engineering, navigation, leadership, even a few novels for long nights at sea. She watches him quietly, knowing the tour is more than duty for him. It is a chance to carve out a role uniquely his, not just as consort but as a representative of the monarchy in his own right. Their conversations are gentle, supportive, tinged with the weight of months spent apart. Philip spends hours studying cultural notes for each country he will visit. Customs, greetings, local traditions, sensitivities, languages, he reviews them all. He practices pronunciations, rehearses formal phrases, and memorizes the names of leaders and officials. He insists on honoring each culture properly. Respect, he believes, is a form of strength. In quieter moments, he reviews naval procedures, revisiting signals, communications, and emergency protocols. Even though the ship will have its own captain, Philip refuses to be a passive passenger. He wants to understand every detail of the journey from a seaman's perspective, not just a royal one. As the departure day approaches, the palace grows heavier with anticipation. The final dossier is created, hundreds of pages detailing events, speeches, weather patterns, security considerations, and diplomatic expectations. Philip reads it from start to finish, marking notes, correcting inaccuracies, and updating sections himself. He wants the tour to run with the exactness of a well-commanded vessel. On the last night, the palace falls quiet. Philip reviews the preparations one final time, then closes the folder with a sense of resolve. Elizabeth sits beside him, offering the calm strength only she can give. They share a brief conversation, nothing dramatic, just a simple exchange of pride, encouragement, and mutual understanding. They both know this tour will define him in new ways. The next morning, the departure is swift and disciplined. Staff load luggage, officers finalize arrangements, and the press gathers as Philip steps out in full uniform. He carries himself with confidence, purpose, and readiness for the months ahead. Before entering the car, he glances back at Elizabeth. A single nod passes between them, silent, strong, unbreakable. He turns away, ready to face the world. The tour begins not as a royal excursion, but as a mission shaped by preparation, duty, and the steady resolve of a man determined to serve.
The story of British troops moving through the Suez Canal begins with one simple truth. The canal was the lifeline of the British Empire. Whoever controlled it controlled the path between Europe, Asia, and Africa. For Britain, it wasn't just a waterway. It was strategy, influence, and power. As tension increased in the Middle East, Britain relied heavily on this narrow stretch of water. Ships carrying soldiers, equipment, vehicles, and supplies passed through the canal day after day. These troops were not simply traveling. They were repositioning, reinforcing, and protecting Britain's hold on one of the most important pieces of geography in the world. The movement of troops was highly organized. British military planners mapped out every detail, from departure timings to fuel use to the transfer of equipment. Convoys of ships entered the canal in formation, guided by pilots who understood every bend and current. Soldiers stood on deck watching the desert loom on both sides, aware that this passage was the gateway to Britain's presence across the eastern Mediterranean and beyond. The canal turned into a corridor of constant motion. Infantry battalions, armored units, engineers, medical teams, and communication specialists all passed through it. Some were heading to reinforce bases in Cyprus, Aden, and the Gulf. Others were being rotated home after exhausting months of service. Every ship represented a piece of Britain's global military structure, and every passage through the canal symbolized the empire's reach. For troops traveling from Suez toward Britain, the journey carried a different meaning. These soldiers had spent months in the intense heat of the Middle East, guarding supply lines, securing British interests, and stabilizing territories in a moment of shifting political power. As their ships passed from the Red Sea into the Mediterranean, many felt a mix of relief and pride. They had served in one of the most critical zones of the post-war world. Meanwhile, British commanders tracked every movement with precision. Communications flowed from Cairo to London, from naval headquarters to military intelligence rooms. The canal's security was constantly monitored, as any disruption could block the movement of entire fleets. The troops understood the importance. If the canal closed, Britain's global reach would shrink overnight. Even as the political situation grew more complicated, the troop movements continued. The British military depended on the canal as the fastest route between colonies, protectorates, and strategic bases. Supplies for operations in Asia flowed through it. Reinforcements for Middle Eastern forces depended on it. Every shipment of weapons, vehicles, and machinery used the same narrow passage. The canal became a symbol of both dependence and vulnerability. Troops returning from the region knew that their mission had been tied directly to this stretch of water. Their presence ensured Britain remained visible and influential across regions where power was shifting rapidly. By the time ships reached the western end of the canal and continued toward the Mediterranean, soldiers could see the transition, desert giving way to open sea. From there, the long voyage back to Britain began. For many, it marked the end of a demanding chapter. For others, it was simply a brief pause before being reassigned once again. In the end, the movement of troops through the Suez Canal was more than logistics. It was the demonstration of Britain's global strategy, a reflection of its military commitment, and a reminder of the empire's dependence on a narrow waterway that connected continents. Every soldier who passed through it became part of a larger story, one shaped by geography, politics, and the enduring struggle to maintain influence in a rapidly changing world.
The crisis begins with a shockwave moving across international news wires. Israeli forces have launched a sudden and forceful attack on Egypt. In London, this announcement spreads quickly through the halls of power. Reports describe Israeli units driving deep into the Sinai Peninsula, advancing with remarkable coordination. Airfields fall, Egyptian positions collapse, and armoured columns push toward the Suez Canal. What appears to the world as a bold, unexpected military strike is, within Britain's inner circle, anything but a surprise. Inside the British government, the truth is quietly known. This attack was not spontaneous. It was part of a secret agreement hidden behind diplomatic language and political speeches. Israel would strike first. Britain and France would then step in, claiming the need to protect international shipping and restore order. In reality, all roads lead to one goal: regaining control of the Suez Canal and weakening Egypt's leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, whose nationalisation of the canal challenged Britain's global status. In the Crown, the energy inside Downing Street is tense and controlled, but beneath the surface is a sense of calculated urgency. The Israeli advance is monitored in real time. Maps of the Sinai desert fill desks. Advisors deliver updates on troop progress. Military planners follow every mile gained by Israeli forces. And at the centre of it all stands Prime Minister Anthony Eden, determined, defensive, and increasingly fragile. He believes that Nasser's rise threatens Britain's position in the world, and the Israeli attack is the first step in a plan he considers vital. But the world is not easily convinced. The speed of Israel's offensive raises questions. Countries demand explanations. Diplomats call for restraint. Newspapers around Europe begin to piece together hints of coordination. Meanwhile, Israeli forces continue to push across the desert, destroying infrastructure, capturing strongpoints, and controlling key roads. The operation appears incredibly efficient, too efficient to be spontaneous. Back in London, the tension builds. The Crown shows the political storm forming around Eden as this attack unfolds. The British government must maintain the illusion of neutrality while quietly preparing to intervene. Ministries operate on a dual track, public statements calling for peace while private messages confirm each stage of the secret plan. Eden insists that Britain cannot allow Egypt to dominate the canal, a waterway tied to decades of imperial influence. Yet pressure mounts from all sides. Some advisors warn that partnering with Israel will jeopardize Britain's international reputation. The United States expresses serious concern, questioning Britain's honesty. The Queen is briefed with partial information, seeing the rising stakes but sensing something deeper, something not fully told to her. She witnesses Eden's growing desperation, the weight of decisions he can no longer escape. As Israel's attack intensifies, Britain and France issue an ultimatum to both sides, demanding a withdrawal from the Canal zone. The ultimatum is crafted to fail, designed to pave the way for British and French intervention. Israel's forces are already advancing, and Egypt refuses to surrender its own territory. Exactly as the secret plan intended, Britain prepares to launch airstrikes and military action under the banner of peacekeeping. But the backlash is immediate. The world sees through the strategy. The United States condemns it. The United Nations demands accountability. Eden's confidence begins to fracture. His health weakens. His government faces fierce criticism. What was meant to be a display of British strength becomes a global embarrassment, exposing political misjudgment and the fading power of the British Empire. In the Crown, the Israel-Egypt conflict becomes more than a regional war. It becomes the trigger for a political collapse in London, a collapse centred around Eden's ambition, secrecy, and miscalculation. The Israeli attack that was supposed to secure Britain's influence, instead, reveals how much of that influence has already slipped away. For the monarchy, it becomes another moment where the Queen must watch her government buckle under the weight of decisions made in secrecy and executed in desperation. The attack on Egypt marks the turning point of the Suez Crisis, the moment when military action, political ambition, and international reality collide. In the series, it represents a nation confronting its limits and a leader losing control of the very plan he believed would restore Britain's place in the world.